Kalen Vire stood under the domed expanse of the intergalactic Concord Hall, heart steady, eyes forward. He had rehearsed this moment so many times and no longer felt real. Earth's first representative to address the Council as an official cultural envoy. His black and silver uniform, sleek and unfamiliar, hugged his frame as if meant for someone more confident. He was confident. Or at least he had been, until now. The chamber was circular, its walls alive with holographic projections of galaxies, planetary systems, and streaming interstellar data. Tiered balconies housed counselors of every species, their symbols and languages suspended in glowing sigils before them. There were amphibians in floating suits, crystalline lifeforms refracting light, silicon-bodied avatars flickering with thought. And then, to his left, her. Zeryl. Ambassador of the Varellan Ascendancy. She was unlike anything he had expected when Earth received the Council's invitation. Graceful and unmistakably alien, she had the poise of a queen and the stillness of a predator. Her body was a harmonious blend of humanoid and vulpine, standing tall with a fluid, digitigrade grace, cloaked in a long diplomatic robe that left room for her long, expressive tail. Her fur was vivid orange streaked with amber, her eyes glowing gold, flecked with emerald near the edges. He tried not to look at her now. He needed to finish his speech. "We believe in mutual respect," Kalen continued, voice calm but low. "In human society, consent is the basis for all interaction. We practice limited physical contact, with handshakes signifying trust." That's when he felt it. Something coiling around his leg. Soft, strong. Warm. He didn't break eye contact with the crowd. Didn't flinch. But his heart missed a beat. The sensation was unmistakable. A tail, smooth and strong, curling upward from the floor and latching gently around his right calf. His eyes flicked down and confirmed it. Vulpine. Orange. Glowing at the tip. Zeryl hadn't moved from her chair. She hadn't even glanced his way. But her tail was unmistakably his newest accessory. Kalen paused, long enough for murmurs to ripple across the balconies like a living tide. "In many cultures," he managed, the crack in his voice nearly imperceptible, "physical proximity is a signal of trust. But only if invited." Now his gaze moved to Zeryl. Her golden eyes met his without a trace of shame. No apology. No amusement. Just calm evaluation, as if his reaction would determine the next 1,000 years of policy. "In mine," she said evenly, her voice a low, melodic hum laced with confidence. "The tail chooses instinctively. It acts not as an offense, but a declaration." The tail pulsed once, then held still. Kalen stood straighter. "And what declaration is that?" he asked. Zeryl's tail gave the slightest squeeze. "Willingness," she said. He didn't know what to say to that. But somehow, words no longer seemed like the most important language being spoken in that room. Kalen's mind raced beneath the surface of his composed exterior. Protocol didn't cover this. He'd been briefed on customs, gestures, negotiation postures, but not on being claimed mid-address by a diplomat with fur like fire and eyes like a solar flare. Still, he didn't recall. If this was a test, it was one no Earth representative had ever faced. And if it was something else, some act of defiance, or even protection, he'd need to understand it before he reacted. The speech moved on. He delivered the remainder with deliberate calm, voice steady, posture disciplined. He spoke of Earth's cultural philosophies, the importance of intent in human diplomacy, the rise of empathy over conquest. But the entire time, Zeryl's tail remained wrapped around his leg. No one interrupted. No one challenged it directly. But the air grew heavier with every syllable he spoke, as if the room itself was recalibrating. The tension was intellectual, not aggressive. This was history in the making, and everyone present felt it. When he finished, a smattering of applause filtered through the chamber, not the enthusiastic bursts he might have hoped for, but the curious, measured kind. The kind you give when you're still deciding whether what you just witnessed was brilliance or blasphemy. He stepped down from the speaker's dais and immediately felt a tug, not harsh, but definitive. Zero rose in perfect sync with him, her movement so graceful it was nearly silent. Her tail still held him. Every delegate turned to watch. The murmurs grew. Translator spheres began whispering urgent queries to their hosts. Some delegates leaned forward. Others recoiled in wary silence. Kalen kept his voice low. "Ambassador Zero," he said through barely parted lips, "we discussed protocol yesterday." "We did," she replied softly, her head still forward, eyes calm. "And protocol has its place. But instinct is older. Instinct doesn't usually grip someone's leg in the middle of a diplomatic address." Her eyes flicked to him at last, and her gaze was so piercing it stopped his words cold. "You were vulnerable. Alone. Under scrutiny by powers you barely know. If you think this was seduction, you are mistaken." "Then what was it?" "Claim," she said. "And protection." He blinked. "You're saying this was to shield me?" Her tail began to uncoil, slowly, reverently, retracting behind her as though she were granting him freedom he hadn't known he was missing. "I didn't know I would do it," she said. "But I do not regret that I did." They stood in silence, surrounded by a chamber of beings who couldn't stop watching. No one interrupted them. No one dared. Finally, she gestured with her hand toward the private corridor to the right of the main chamber, reserved for cross-species diplomatic debriefings. "Come," she said simply. He hesitated. Then followed. Because part of him already knew, no matter what the rest of the galaxy thought, this was no longer just about protocol. It was about something deeper. And it had already begun. The corridor was quieter than he expected, sealed with a soft pneumatic hiss that left the chaos of the council chamber behind them like a closed book. Smooth, dark walls lit with a low bioluminescent glow guided their path. Silent drones hovered overhead, verifying clearances and activating privacy dampeners. Kalen's boots echoed faintly on the polished floor, while Zeryl's step made no sound at all, save for the subtle swish of her tail trailing behind her. They walked for a moment in silence until they reached a small negotiation suite. The doors parted without command. The chamber inside was furnished with smooth organic chairs, a single central table, and no surveillance. Only the red ring on the wall indicating active privacy mode. Zeryl entered first, and turned toward him as the doors sealed shut. "You handled that well," she said, folding her arms over her chest. "Most males would have stumbled." Kalen remained standing, keeping a formal distance. "You surprised me, Ambassador." She tilted her head slightly. "Is that complaint or compliment?" "Still deciding." She gave the faintest smile, and her ears twitched toward him in what he guessed was amusement. "Good. That means you're thinking." Then, more seriously, she added, "We should talk about what just happened before the speculation spreads." "You mean the moment your tail wrapped around my leg and half the council assumed we were either negotiating a secret alliance or mating in public?" Her expression didn't shift, but her tail gave a flick. "Among the Virellan, tail contact during diplomatic address is extremely rare. And often symbolic." "Symbolic of what, exactly?" She stepped forward, not threatening, just closing the space. "Vulnerability. Intent. And yes, attraction." Kalen didn't retreat. "So you're saying it wasn't political?" "It wasn't only political. But you were alone up there. Unarmed in every sense. And the moment I realized some among the council might try to twist your words against you, I acted. Our tails are linked to instinct. Reflex. Protection. I didn't plan it. But I do not apologize for it." He studied her, unsure if he should feel honored, offended, or deeply alarmed. "Back on Earth," he said, "we don't wrap our legs around someone to defend them." "No," she replied. "You stand behind them and shoot." Kalen almost laughed. Instead, he sat down, rubbing his brow. "What now, Zeryl? Earth Command is going to lose their minds over this. The Council's going to question whether I've been compromised." "Let them," she said with complete calm. "You're still here. Still rational." And if they're afraid of what a single bond implies, they're not ready for what unity truly demands. His eyes met hers. Bond? She nodded. The first phase, at least. Resonance. The beginning of alignment between two biofields. You're saying your tale initiated a neurological link? No, she said slowly. We did. Together. You could have recoiled. Could have denounced the act mid-speech. But you didn't. Your body didn't reject the connection. You leaned into it. Kaylin's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from something else. Something deeper. So what does that mean? Zeril didn't blink. It means we've started something, she said. And neither of us fully understands what it is yet. Kaylin leaned forward, elbows on the smooth, organic table. The silence between them grew heavy, charged, but not hostile. Zeril stood with her arms still crossed, her orange fur catching the subtle ambient light like living fire. Her eyes never left his, though they softened slightly as if gauging his reaction. I'm not saying I regret what happened, he finally said. But you've put me in a position I don't entirely understand. Council members are already whispering. Earth Command will demand a report by nightfall. My own species might question whether I can still act independently. Zeril stepped closer, this time without pretense. Her tail trailed lightly behind her, relaxed but alert. Do you think I don't face consequences for this? My people are even less forgiving of emotional breaches. Bonds between species, especially uninitiated ones, are almost unheard of among the Varellan. He looked up. Then why did you do it? Her golden eyes burned with certainty. Because the moment your voice started to shake, I realized the chamber had turned against you. Subtly, yes, but it shifted. I felt it. And in that instant I had to choose, observe, or act. He didn't answer at first. A long breath slipped through his nose. You acted, he said quietly. I did. And now the bond has begun. Whether either of us likes it or not. Kaylin stood again, instinctively stepping closer until they were only a breath apart. So where does that leave us, Ambassador? Are we involved? Or is this just a diplomatic mess dressed up in poetic language? Her lips curled slightly at that. Your species has such a need to define things. As if clarity protects you from chaos. It does. At least on my world. Zeril considered that, then reached out and touched his wrist, not with her tail this time, but with her hand. It was warm. Calloused from training, yet still soft in a way that surprised him. Call it what you like, she said. But the truth doesn't care what name you give it. Her voice dropped, gentler now. Do you feel it? The pull beneath your thoughts. The way my presence sits just under your skin? Because I do. Kaylin felt it too. Not overt. Not invasive. Just a quiet awareness humming at the edge of his mind since the moment they'd touched. A new rhythm. A sync. He nodded. I feel it. Zeril's tail brushed lightly against the back of his knee, a gesture so subtle it could have been wind, if wind had intent. This doesn't have to mean alliance, she said. Or romance. Or rebellion. It only has to mean one thing, that in a moment of instinct, our barriers fell. And we didn't put them back up. Kaylin met her gaze and, for the first time since the speech, allowed himself to relax. Then let's not run from it, he said. Let's figure out what it is, together. Zeril's eyes shimmered, and her tail slowly coiled upward, not to bind, but to rest lightly against his hip. Agreed, she whispered. And in that quiet chamber, far from the eyes of the galaxy, the first real moment between them began, not as representatives, but as two people caught in the unexpected gravity of something larger than themselves. Kaylin didn't sleep that night. He lay in the ambassadorial quarters Earth had been granted on the Unity Ring, staring at the artificial stars projected across the curved ceiling. It was a beautiful illusion, an exact mimicry of the open sky as seen from Earth's southern hemisphere. But it brought him no comfort. Because all he could think about was her. Zeril. The way her golden eyes didn't blink when she spoke. The way her tail communicated more than her words ever did. The warmth of her hand on his wrist. And that quiet hum of presence, like an echo of her thoughts brushing against the edges of his own. It wasn't just in his head. He knew that now. The bond, resonance, as she'd called it, was real. His own medical scans had shown unusual synaptic activity after their contact. Neurocoherence spikes. Mild biothermal fluctuation. Subtle electromagnetic feedback between them whenever they were within a certain range. And it had only grown stronger since the encounter. At dawn, he stood by the curved window and sipped nutrient broth from a silver mug, watching the slow rotation of the station reveal a strip of starlight. His internal calm pinged, a secure message from Earth Central. The subject line, status inquiry, virulent contact. The body, please clarify nature of physical interaction during public session. Did virulent ambassador initiate neural link? Was it consensual? Kalen didn't respond. Instead, he encrypted the message and sent back a single line. Further clarification pending joint debrief. Situation evolving. He didn't have a better answer yet. At precisely 0700 hours, the door chimes sounded. Not a knock, a formal ping. He already knew who it would be. He opened the door to find Zero standing there, already dressed in a new diplomatic uniform, deep indigo with bronze accents, tailored close to her body and flaring at the calves to accommodate her digitigrade stance. Her orange fur was immaculately brushed, catching the ambient light and soft waves. Her tail swayed behind her in a slow, relaxed arc. "You're up early," she said. "I never slept." "Good," she replied without judgment. "Neither did I." They regarded each other for a moment. The air between them hummed faintly again, subtle but real, a current flowing between nerve endings. "I've requested a neutral scan," she said, "by a third-party medical officer from the Audari system. They're trusted by both your people and mine. You think the Council will believe us more if we have independent validation?" "No," she said. "But I think you need it. Your people need it. The more facts you have, the less they can twist this into something else." Kalen stepped aside and gestured her in. She entered slowly, tail brushing the floor behind her like a slow-burning fuse. "You really think this is going to blow up?" he asked. She turned to face him. "It already has. The question is whether we guide the fire or let it consume us." He set his mug down and leaned against the table. "You keep talking like we're in this together." Zero stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the faint spice of her scent, alien, floral, electric. "We are," she said softly. "Whether your people accept it or not." The med base smelled like citrus disinfectant and ozone, lit with sterile white light that reflected off curved walls and floating diagnostic panels. Kalen sat on a reclined examination cradle while a slender, insectomedic from the Audari system, Dr. Resch, a species of translucent carapace and levitating lenses, buzzed gently around him, monitoring his biofeedback with delicacy and absolute precision. Zero stood nearby, still and composed, arms crossed behind her back in a posture of neutral readiness. Her tail was tucked close to her legs, not touching him, but even in that quiet space Kalen could feel her. Like pressure in his blood or static beneath his skin. Subject displays elevated gamma coherence across prefrontal and insular regions. Resch chirped in flawless translator-modulated English. Neural activity is synchronized with environmental stimuli, and an external secondary field. Kalen raised an eyebrow. "You mean hers?" "Correct. Field resonance suggests sympathetic attunement. This is not a manipulation. Not coercive. This is harmonious convergence." Zero tilted her head. "In virulent physiology, such synchronization only occurs during high empathy bonds. Mates, siblings, or elite kintactyls during wartime." Kalen blinked. "So what does that make us?" Dr. Resch gave a flutter of wings. "New." Kalen couldn't help but snort. "That's a nice way of saying I'm a walking diplomatic incident." "No," Resch replied. "You are an evolutionary precedent." Zero stepped forward now, slowly, as if not to disrupt the process. Run the final sync test, she said. The one for emotional feedback. Kaylin looked at her. You didn't say there'd be emotional feedback. Her golden eyes glittered. I didn't say there wouldn't be. Resh hovered closer, antennae flicking. Consent, Ambassador Vire? Kaylin nodded. Do it. Resh activated the sync field. At first, Kaylin felt only warmth. Then, something else. Pressure behind the eyes. A presence, not a voice, not thoughts, but impressions. Concern. Curiosity. A flicker of protectiveness. And beneath that, deeper, something that startled him more than anything else. Attraction. Not crude. Not instinctual. But reverent, focused, sharp, controlled. Zero felt something for him, and it ran deeper than protocol, or even fascination. Kaylin's breath caught in his throat. His eyes opened, and met hers. Her expression hadn't changed, but her tail flicked, once sharply, like it knew it had been seen. Dr. Resh chirped once, and shut down the field. Confirmation complete. Emotional bleed minimal. Link is active but stable. No corruption detected. You are both changed. But compatible. Kaylin slowly sat upright, heart pounding. What happens now? Zero looked at Resh. You log the results. You notify the council. Resh bobbed midair. And you? Zero turned back to Kaylin, her voice quiet but certain. We decide whether to let them define what this is, or define it ourselves. The report went out that evening, encrypted, triple-signed, verified by both Varellan and Earthside Biocommand liaisons. Dr. Resh's findings were indisputable. The bond was genuine, mutual, and biologically unprecedented. No signs of neural tampering. No coercion. Just compatibility. And that terrified everyone. Kaylin knew at the moment the first encrypted messages started flooding his terminal. Earth Command demanded an immediate explanation. The Council called for an emergency ethics review. Varellan High Chancellors sent inquiries cloaked in stiff formality, clearly expecting Zero to disavow what had happened. But she didn't. She stood beside him in every meeting, every briefing, every scan. And as the storm swelled around them, she never once reached for his leg with her tail again, but she didn't need to. That resonance still lived between them, a current neither of them could shut off. A frequency tuned now to two signatures, humming beneath every glance. In private, they spoke more freely. Kaylin learned she'd been an elite Varellan strategist before she entered diplomacy. That she had turned down an admiralship to serve as ambassador to the Unity Council. That she'd never bonded with anyone before. I never needed to, she said one evening, standing in the soft glow of his quarters. I never wanted to. Until you. Kaylin, sitting at the edge of his bunk, blinked. That sounds serious. Zero nodded. It is. We don't bond lightly. And once it starts, it rarely fades. It's not obsession, it's alignment. A knowing. He looked up at her. So, what do we do about it? Zero's eyes flickered gently, her ears pivoting to track his words. She took 2 steps forward, then dropped into a crouch before him, digitigrade legs folding effortlessly beneath her. Her tail curled in a slow arc behind her, as she rested her hands lightly on his knees. We stop waiting for approval, she said. And we start doing what this bond demands. Kaylin's breath hitched. Which is? She looked up at him, and for a heartbeat there was no diplomat in her eyes, only the woman, the being, the bond. Trust. He swallowed hard. You trust me? I wouldn't be here if I didn't. Her hands slid back, and she stood again, but slower this time, her fur brushing against his arms. Her tail didn't coil or claim, but it swept behind her as if signaling the answer he hadn't yet found the courage to voice. The next morning, a new summons arrived. This one wasn't from Earth. It wasn't from the Council. It came from the Enforcement Subcommittee, 5 delegates who answered to no one but the core tenets of interspecies diplomacy. It contained 3 lines. Mission deployment, Polaris conflict zone. Objective, peace restoration via unconventional env. Assignment: Virelin Earth pair. Kalen looked up from the terminal screen. Zero was already standing at the window, arms folded, tails swaying in that quiet rhythm of calculation. "They're testing us," he said. Her ears flicked toward him. "No. They're fearing us. And that's how you know we're changing something." The journey to Polaris took less than a day in Council-class transit, sleek, faster than light, fully automated. No security detail. No press. Just the 2 of them seated side by side in a quiet cabin surrounded by stars that streaked past like cosmic rainfall. Kalen sat in silence, reviewing the conflict brief on a holodisplay. 2 factions on Polaris 3, the Delari, amphibious and photosynthetic, and the Orson, a species of desert-dwelling reptilids. Both had cohabitated the terraformed planet for 37 cycles, bound by a fragile peace agreement enforced by shared atmospheric stabilizers. That agreement had shattered 6 months ago. Sabotage. Resource hoarding. Border incursions. The usual spiral into pre-war madness. Every envoy pair sent by the Council had failed. 4 had been forced to retreat. 1 had disappeared entirely. Now it was their turn. Zero didn't speak for most of the trip. She didn't need to. The bond between them had deepened over the last 2 days. It wasn't thoughts, no invasive flashes or words in his head, but sensation. Emotion. When she felt tension, Kalen felt heat on the back of his neck. When he clenched his jaw in concentration, she shifted subtly, ears angling to mirror him. Finally, as the ship dropped from FTL into orbit around Polaris 3, she broke the silence. "They're not just watching what we do," she said. "They're watching how we do it. If we fight. If we falter. If we contradict." Kalen nodded, eyes still on the briefing. "They want to know if the bond is stable, or if it turns us into a liability under pressure." Zero turned her head slowly toward him, orange fur glowing in the soft console light. "Is it stable?" He met her eyes. "You tell me." Her tail slid across the floor slowly, looping toward him, not to bind, not to claim, but to touch. Just the tip, resting on his boot like a whispered promise. "It's steady," she said. "For now." The shuttle descended through the atmosphere, the blue sky giving way to ochre plains streaked with dried rivers and domed cities scarred with damage. Explosions had blackened the edges of the neutral zone. Barricades marked where Council drones had once tried, and failed, to enforce order. They landed on a Council-flagged platform in the center of a fractured diplomatic complex, half ruined but still functional. When the ramp lowered, the air hit them, hot, dry, and dense with tension. Kalen could feel it immediately. Not just in his bones, but in the bond. Zero's ears twitched twice. Her tail went rigid, then lowered. "They're watching us," she murmured. "From where?" "Everywhere." And they were. Delari observers peered from beneath their water-shielded domes. Orson lookouts crouched in high ground, armored scales glinting with passive light dampeners. No one greeted them. No honor guard. No council representative. Only silence and suspicion. Kalen stepped forward. Zero walked beside him. Either of them spoke. Not yet. Because sometimes presence was the first language. They were escorted, wordlessly, through the half-crumbling corridor of the central neutral zone by 2 council drones, their optics flickering with low-energy threat detection. Above, security cameras followed their every move. Beyond the high transparent walls, the factions watched, Delari in their glistening exosuits filled with moisture, fins twitching as they shifted in the dry air. Orson hunched in the shadows, their movements deliberate, eyes unblinking and sharp. Zero walked as though the pressure didn't exist. Her tail flowed behind her like a banner, every movement precise. Kalen mirrored her pace, his own steps grounded and unhurried, though the weight of what this meant pressed into every joint. At the heart of the compound, a council-built chamber waited, circular, domed, minimally furnished, with a low central hollow table surrounded by 8 chairs. 4 for each faction. They entered to find the room empty. No delegates. No representatives. Just silence, and tension so thick it buzzed against their skin. Kalen exhaled slowly. You think this is a test? Zeril nodded once. A ritualized one. See how long we'll wait. See if we'll flinch. How long do we wait? Until they blink first. So they sat. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The lights subtly dimmed and brightened in standard diplomatic cycles, marking the passage of time. Kalen tapped the edge of the table once, trying to distract his rising frustration. Zeril said nothing, but her tail, which had been loosely curled behind her, slowly inched toward his chair. He didn't react. Not with movement. But something in him softened. Then, finally, the doors opened. For Delari entered first, gliding on moist footpads, eyes blinking sideways, their formal sashes shimmering with dew-repellent fibers. Behind them came the Orson, slower, heavier, tails dragging behind them like weighted threats. Their armor was ceremonial, but Kalen could see scorch marks on the shoulder plates. This wasn't just theater. They had come from conflict. Neither side acknowledged the other. None bowed. Zeril stood. Envoys Zeril and Vire, representing the Concord and acting under emergency unity directive, she said clearly, with no hint of challenge. No one replied. So Kalen stood beside her. You know why we're here. You've rejected the council. You've burned through 3 peace teams and destroyed 2 shared installations. And yet, you haven't gone to war. A low thrum echoed from one of the Orson, deep in the chest. Because we are not suicidal. The Delari speaker, taller, with a cluster of bioluminescent ridges on his forehead, hissed gently. Nor are we interested in extinction. But neither will we surrender our claim. Then, Zeril said slowly, tail swaying once behind her. You are both still hoping. And hope is a thread we can pull. No one interrupted. And for the first time since they'd landed, Kalen felt it, a hesitation. Small, almost imperceptible, but real. So he leaned in, resting both palms on the table. We're not here to force peace. We're here to sit in the fire with you, until something new burns through. Zeril's voice followed his, lower, richer. And we won't leave. The Delari flicked their fins. The Orson's claws twitched once. The tension didn't break. But it shifted. Not progress. But the beginning of presence. And sometimes that was enough. The first session lasted 4 hours. There was no resolution. No apology. No concession. But neither side walked out. Kalen and Zeril sat in the center, listening as the factions hurled data, accusations, and ancient grievances at each other like weapons. Maps were projected. Air samples debated. Timelines dissected with clinical venom. The Delari accused the Orson of altering the hydrological balance by siphoning underground vapor lines. The Orson insisted the Delari had seeded the upper atmosphere with destabilizing aerosols to sabotage their surface crops. Zeril remained quiet through most of it, but Kalen could feel the twitch of her thoughts like sparks through the bond. Her tail never touched him. Not here. But her emotional signal, subtle but unmistakable, rippled through him. Watch, not react. Listen, not interrupt. This is not battle. This is weather. Let it pass. He obeyed. Only when the Delari envoy hissed that the Orson still reeked of blood from their hatch chambers did Zeril finally speak. I was born during war, she said, voice low but audible. I know the scent of blood. But I also know that those who truly crave peace never speak it loudly. They whisper it. To those brave enough to listen. The Delari envoy blinked both sets of eyes, the glow along his gill ridges dimming slightly. And then the Orson chieftain did something unexpected. He leaned forward. Only slightly. Barely enough to suggest it. But it was a shift. When the session ended, the factions withdrew without saying a word to each other. But no one drew weapons. No one shouted. In this place, silence had become the new diplomacy. As the room emptied, Kalen let out a long breath and rubbed his temples. That was a starting line, Cyril said simply, moving beside him. She stood with a certain elegance that reminded him of wind just before a storm, calm, but waiting. They're not here to solve the problem. Not yet. They're here to decide if we're worth the risk of trying. He gave her a tired smile. And what do you think? I think we passed the first test. They walked out together into the open dusk of the Polaris Plains. The horizon stretched endless and red, the air thick with static from the planet's irregular magnetic fields. For the first time in hours, they were alone. Cyril's tail brushed the back of his hand. Not a claim. Not even a message. Just contact. Do you regret coming here? She asked, not facing him. Kalen shook his head. No. I'd rather be here, walking into the fire with you, than anywhere else playing safe games. Cyril turned to him slowly. Her eyes reflected the last light of the sun like molten gold. If this goes wrong, they won't just recall you, she said. They'll strip your legacy. Earth's position will be blamed for everything. Kalen held her gaze. Then let them. I didn't come to make Earth look pretty. I came to stand where it counts. Her tail looped gently around his forearm. Not possessive. Just anchored. I won't let them take you, she said. I won't let them take us, he replied. And beneath the blood-red sky of a fractured world, two bonded envoys stood together, already shaping the future in ways the galaxy wasn't ready for. Night fell fast on Polaris. The station lights flickered to low spectrum mode, casting the complex in deep purples and rust-red glows. Artificial moons rotated high above, their reflected illumination soft and eerie. Most of the staff retreated into guarded wings, leaving the central negotiation compound silent except for the occasional sweep of a hovering drone. Kalen sat alone in the observation atrium, a cup of citrus tea growing cold in his hands. Below him, the planet's vast cracked plains shimmered under atmospheric haze, broken only by the occasional spire of an old hydro distributor. The landscape looked ancient, scarred but enduring, much like the people who lived on it. He heard her before he saw her. Not from sound, but from the shift in the air, the bond stirring inside him like a compass needle twitching toward true north. Cyril entered without a word. Her silhouette backlit by the soft corridor glow, fur brushed by the breeze of the temperature regulators. She moved with that same effortless poise, but something in her posture was different. Less rigid. More contemplative. She stepped beside him, folding her arms behind her back. You should rest, she said. I can't, Kalen murmured. Every time I close my eyes, I think about how thin the wire is we're walking. One wrong phrase tomorrow and this whole thing collapses. She didn't answer immediately. Then, fear is the price of attempting what others won't. He looked at her, studying her profile in the low light. You're not afraid? Cyril's golden eyes stayed on the horizon. I'm afraid constantly. Of failure. Of disgrace. Of hurting you. Of what this bond might become. Her tail stirred slowly, then flicked and came to rest against his shoulder. But fear only means I'm aware of the consequences, she added. It doesn't mean I stop moving. Kalen turned fully toward her. You've changed. So have you. He nodded, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then he asked the question that had lingered in the back of his mind since their first shared look in the council chamber. What happens if this bond deepens? If we lose ourselves in it? Cyril turned toward him at last, tail looping loosely around his forearm. Then we remember who we were before. And we choose who we are now. Together. Kalen's throat tightened. You make that sound easy. It's not. But I've never had an anchor before, Kalen. She said his name like it was sacred. He reached up slowly, brushing his fingers along the soft fur of her jaw. Neither have I. They stayed like that for a long moment, two representatives from species never meant to meet, connected not by politics or alliance, but by something older. Rawer. Real. Zero leaned forward until their foreheads touched. Her breath was warm against his skin. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she whispered, "we face it as one." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Dawn on Polaris came with no sun, just a gradual brightening of the dusty sky into a smoldering gray-pink, like the embers of a fire that never quite went out. The second round of negotiations began before the heat settled in. Both factions returned, still guarded, still silent, but something had shifted. The Delari no longer stood with their backs to the Orson. The Orson no longer entered with their claws flexed in display. No words of greeting passed between them, but the old choreography of disdain had softened. Zero noticed it first. A subtle adjustment of posture. Less tension in the Delari dorsal fins. The Orson's tails, once raised in subtle threat, now rested near the floor. "They're preparing to listen," she murmured to Kalen, just before they entered the room. He gave her a glance. "Or preparing to justify a storm." Zero's mouth twitched faintly, her version of a smirk. "Then we give them weather worth surviving." Inside, the conversation didn't begin with politics. It started with loss. A Delari diplomat, face partially obscured by an iridescent breathing veil, quietly spoke of a sunken nursery dome, destroyed in the sabotage of a filtration plant 2 months ago. Over 200 Delari spawnlings lost, their water sacs ruptured before emergency recovery could arrive. An Orson general, voice rough with gravel and pride, responded with his own truth, a dry season blight that had turned their crops to ash, their hatched mothers starving themselves so the next generation could feed. Neither side argued. They listened. And in that listening, something long buried surfaced. Kalen saw it, felt it, through their bond, through Zeryl's subtle shift beside him. Empathy. Not agreement. But recognition. Grief matched with grief. Then the Delari envoy did something unexpected. He reached into the folds of his sash and drew out a data prism. With deliberate motion, he activated it, revealing schematics for a shared atmospheric harvesting rig. Technology initially designed for weather balancing, now repurposed for vapor collection. He slid it across the table to the Orson. "We built this as a contingency," he said. "We never deployed it. It would take both of our atmospheres to calibrate. But it might restore balance." Silence. Then the Orson general placed a scaled hand on the table and turned the prism gently, examining its inner glow. "A gesture," the general said. "We see it." Zero leaned forward. "Will you match it?" The Orson met her gaze. "We will consider matching it." And that was enough. Not peace, but momentum. As the factions left to consult privately, the tension that had once flooded the negotiation dome thinned like mist under morning light. Kalen and Zero remained behind. He let out a breath and leaned back in his chair. "I didn't think we'd get that today." Zero stepped behind him, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders, tail brushing the back of his neck with feather-light reassurance. "They are testing the ground," she said. "Looking for something solid." He looked up at her. "And if it's not there?" Her expression was calm, but her eyes glowed softly. "Then we build it." Outside, 2 enemy envoys stood in the same corridor and did not walk away from each other. The message came at midnight. Encrypted. No source signature. No council seal. Just a cold pulse on Kalen's comm, an anonymous file dump labeled "Proof." He was alone when it arrived, sitting on the edge of his bunk, sweat clinging to his skin from the thick Polaris air. Zeril had gone to run an inspection sweep around the collapsed water network with a neutral drone escort. They were trying to find structural remnants from the old Unity Treaty construction. Evidence of who broke what, and why. He opened the message cautiously. The file contained surveillance data from 3 weeks prior, before he and Zeril had ever arrived. Video footage. Thermal readouts. Access logs. It showed a humanoid figure, not Orson, not Delari, moving through the atmospheric control station at 0400 hours. Cloaked. Precise. Efficient. They bypassed 7 security nodes with surgical ease, planted something, and disappeared. An explosion occurred exactly 90 minutes later. But it wasn't what the saboteur did that chilled Kalen to his core. It was how they got in. Council credentials. Valid ones? Signed off by someone on the inner Unity ring. Kalen stared at the screen, pulse thudding in his ears. The implications were immediate and vast. This wasn't just a planetary conflict. It had been staged. Designed. Manufactured to fail. Council sabotage, he whispered. Someone wanted this bond, us, to fail before it started. The door slid open behind him with a soft hiss, and he didn't need to look to know who it was. He could feel her. The bond rippled like a tight cord suddenly pulled taut. Zero entered, tail low, eyes sharper than usual. You felt it, she said. Something's wrong. He turned the display to face her. We've been set up. She crossed the room in 2 steps and scanned the footage. Her jaw clenched. Her ears flattened. And for a moment, just a second, Kalen saw something he'd never seen in her before. Fear. They used council clearance, she murmured. Not black market credentials. Not forgery. Real access. They meant for it to blow, Kalen said. And they meant to pin it on one of the factions. Either way, the treaty dies. Unity fractures. The bond gets discredited. Zero's claws tapped the console edge. Her voice dropped low. They needed us to fail so they could control the narrative. A human and a Varellan, bonded across instinct? It terrifies them. Because it makes the rules look small. No, she said, golden eyes glowing brighter. Because it makes them look small. They stared at each other. The truth hung between them like gravity. Kalen stood. We bring this to the factions. Let them see what's been done to them. Zero reached for his hand, gripping it tight, not just fingers, but claws gently hooked at his wrist. No, she said. We show them. But not like diplomats. Then how? She stepped closer. Like us. They didn't wait for authorization. By morning, the two of them stood before both factions in the old sun-scorched negotiation dome, flanked by 6 hovering projection nodes. Kalen had arranged them himself, one for each angle, one for each layer of truth. He hadn't slept. Neither had Zero. Their bond thrummed like a tuned string, alive, tense, precise. The Delari came in warily, eyes flickering between each other in silent, subsonic whispers. The Orson entered with more weight in their steps, claws clicking deliberately, armor strapped tight as if preparing for betrayal. No one sat. Kalen didn't waste time. He activated the central node. The footage began to play. The saboteur, tall, humanoid, gait smooth, movement exact, slipping past Delari guards, planting a shaped charge beneath the filtration matrix. A timestamp in the corner ticked like a pulse. Then the explosion. Then the credits log, official council credentials. Unquestionable. Gasps broke across both factions. A Delari envoy dropped his hydration mask. One Orson snarled deep in his throat, but didn't speak. Kalen spoke instead. You were manipulated, he said, voice firm but calm. Your treaty wasn't sabotaged by Delari aggression or Orson retaliation. It was sabotaged by someone who fears what peace between you would prove. What we prove. Zero stepped beside him, her tail sweeping forward and then curling, not around Kalen, but across the ground, forming a line between the factions. The bond we've formed, unexpected, unconventional, has created waves, she said. There are those who benefit from chaos, who rely on disunity, and they are terrified of the idea that different species might align through choice, not protocol. A Delari female moved forward. Her gills pulsed rapidly. Why? Why would the Council sabotage its own negotiation? Not the Council as a whole, Kalen said, but someone inside it. Someone powerful enough to fear what you represent when you don't kill each other. The Orson general stepped toward the hologram, inspecting the footage again. His tail twitched once. Do you have a name? Not yet, Zero said. But we will. And when we do, It will not be your species that pays the price for this treachery. The dome fell silent. Then the Delari envoy spoke again. Slowly. Carefully. Why bring this to us? Why not hold it as leverage? Kalen answered without hesitation. Because trust demands exposure. And peace requires risk. Zeril added. And because we are not here to control you. We are here to show you the cage you were never meant to live in. The two factions looked at each other. Not with hatred this time, but with reckoning. A Delari lowered her head in acknowledgement. An Orson released a hiss, not of aggression, but of respect. They said no words of treaty. No oaths. But neither side left. And sometimes staying is louder than any signature. Kalen turned to Zeril as the factions dispersed into small clusters of private conversation. We just detonated the truth. She nodded. And it landed where it needed to. Her tail slid along his wrist, coiling once, tight, warm, and certain. Now, she said, we see what rises from the crater. The fallout came faster than either of them expected. By the end of the day, the Orson and Delari had requested an unprecedented joint session. No mediators, no translators, no council oversight. Just representatives from both sides, meeting inside a dry reclamation dome that hadn't seen active use since the treaty's first signing. That alone was historic. But more telling were the quiet decisions happening behind the scenes, shared meal delivery between their camps, Delari engineers offering to inspect Orson filtration nodes, an Orson scout returning a stolen Delari data crystal without being asked. It wasn't peace. But it was trust. And trust, once earned, was the rarest element in the galaxy. Kalen stood at the edge of the facility's upper terrace that evening, watching the planes flicker with the faint orange glow of power stations slowly coming back online. The heat still pressed against his skin like a warning, but the tension in his body had eased. Just slightly. He sensed her before he saw her, Zeril, standing behind him, silent but radiating presence. He didn't turn. You feel it too, don't you? He asked softly. Yes. He glanced over his shoulder. She had removed her formal coat. Beneath, the diplomatic tunic hugged her lithe frame, the orange of her fur peeking through the wide collar at her neck and wrists. Her eyes glowed faintly, catching the last rays of light from the horizon. We did it, he said. Not finished. But we tilted something. Zeril stepped closer until her shoulder brushed his. And now the council will act. He nodded grimly. They can't let this stand. We exposed sabotage. Undermined protocol. We weren't supposed to fix anything. They'll call us unstable. She murmured. Too attached. Too instinct-driven. Too human. He turned to her. Will it be enough to separate us? Her tail lifted and coiled gently around his waist, anchoring him. No. Kalen touched her jaw, brushing his thumb across the short, velvety fur. If they come for me, what will you do? Her eyes burned now, not with heat, but with decision. I will stand in front of you. And if they reach past me, I will reach through them. Kalen's voice dropped. That could start a war. Zeril leaned close, her breath warm against his cheek. Then let it start. But they will know one thing before it does. We are not an accident. He closed his eyes for a long moment, then whispered. They'll never understand it, will they? No, she said. Because we didn't ask for it. And they didn't authorize it. And yet here it is. Her tail tightened slightly. Here we are. Behind them, distant lights from the negotiation dome flickered into unity mode, green and blue aligned in tandem, a visual confirmation of collaboration. He pulled her close with both arms, resting his forehead against hers. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Her answer came not in words, but in the rhythmic pulse of her tail, matching the tempo of his heartbeat like a drum that refused to stop. The summons arrived at dawn. A high-priority message from the Unity Council, routed through secure diplomatic relays and encoded with a tone that left no ambiguity. Zeril and Kalen were to report to the Council's primary judiciarium aboard the Central Orbiting Station within 48 hours. The wording was courteous. The implications were not. They were being recalled. Kalen read the message in silence, jaw clenched tight. Across from him, Zeril stood at the console with arms folded, tail held rigid behind her, a stance he now recognized as the closest thing she showed to fury. Controlled. Measured. Dangerous. "They're going to put us on trial," he said. "Dress it up with language like ethics review or bond scrutiny, but it'll be a tribunal." Zeril didn't argue. "They'll want to make an example. Discredit the bond, explain away the sabotage, sweep Polaris under the diplomatic rug." He rubbed his temples. "They'll try to invalidate everything we did here." She turned, stepping toward him until they were only a breath apart. "Then we don't let them." Kalen looked up, eyes hollow from lack of sleep but lit with something deeper now. "You realize if we resist this, if we refuse to back down, they'll brand us radicals. Or worse," she finished for him. "But if we comply, they'll quietly dismantle every step we took. Replace us. Rewrite the record." Her tail rose again, looping loosely around his wrist. "I won't let them erase you." Kalen covered her hand with his. "Then we do this on our terms." By midday, they transmitted their own message, brief, deliberate, and strategic. They would appear before the Council, but only as a pair. No separation. No isolation interviews. They would testify to what they'd seen, done, and proven, together. The response came fast. Conditional approval. Joint testimony authorized. Presence required within 44 standard hours. Travel arrangements assigned. Kalen stared at the words, then looked up at her. "They're giving us rope. To see if we hang ourselves?" Zeril said flatly. That night the factions of Polaris held an unofficial ceremony. No speeches. No flags. Just a solemn exchange of planetary crystals, Delari blue and Orson amber, placed in the soil outside the shared filtration compound. A symbol of restoration. Not peace yet, but mutual claim. Zeril and Kalen stood at the edge of the circle, watching as enemies turned collaborators walked side by side for the first time in decades. A Delari child, transparent fins pulsing with adolescent light, approached them both and extended a hand toward Kalen. The other toward Zeril. They each took it. For one moment, their bond wasn't a political scandal, or a biological anomaly. It was hope in the shape of three connected hands beneath a rust-red sky. As the stars rose above Polaris, Zeril whispered, "We gave them a crack to crawl through." Kalen smiled faintly. "Now we see if light gets in." Their shuttle departed the next morning. The sky watched them leave. And this time, it didn't feel like failure. It felt like witness. The Unity Council's orbital station loomed ahead like a city forged from starlight and control, its hull smooth, silver blue, glimmering in the light of the nearby star. Kalen had seen it before, of course. It was where his journey had begun. But it had never felt so much like an apex predator waiting for judgment. Their shuttle docked without fanfare. No escort. No greeting party. Just two long corridors that led to the judiciarium, a chamber reserved for matters too delicate for public forums, too volatile for routine diplomacy. Zeril walked beside him, her stride steady, her tail low but alert. Kalen could feel the tension humming beneath her skin, the same way he felt it in his own. But neither of them spoke. Because they didn't need to. The bond was alive. Not overwhelming. Not invasive. But there. A hum beneath the noise. A shared awareness. When she exhaled, he relaxed. When his thoughts strayed toward fear, she shifted, just enough to ground him. They passed through 6 biometric checkpoints. Each one scanned their neural signatures. Each one hesitated briefly, reading the resonance between them and failing to fully classify it. Unprecedented, the systems flagged. Undefined. Unnatural. Yet completely real. When they entered the judiciarium, the chamber was already full. 9 senior envoys sat in a crescent arc above a tiered platform, their faces composed but unreadable. Around the perimeter, aides and analysts hovered in silence, datapads glowing, expressions tight. And at the center of it all, standing alone, robed in violet and silver, was the council arbitrator. Kalen had only seen one once, years ago. They were beyond rank, beyond politics. They were the law when law failed. Their judgment was final. Ambassadors Zeril of Virelin and Vyre of Earth. The arbitrator intoned, their voice like crystal scraping through velvet. You stand here today not under accusation, but under observation. Your bond has disrupted procedure, altered perception, raised alarms. Kalen held Zeril's gaze briefly. She nodded. He stepped forward. We didn't ask for the bond, he began. We didn't engineer it. We didn't plan it. But we didn't reject it either. Because it's not a flaw. It's a truth. Zeril followed, her voice cool, composed. You trained us to enforce peace. You trained us to understand. But when we chose instinct, when our bond formed through something you couldn't quantify, you treated it like a virus. A murmuring ripple passed through the chamber. One of the envoys leaned forward. A pale-skinned humanoid from the Indari sphere. Your relationship challenges the neural integrity protocols of interspecies diplomacy. We've never seen emotional resonance this strong between two physiologically incompatible systems. You have now, Kalen said. Another envoy spoke, a crystalline delegate from the Astra Collective. Then explain why you chose to escalate your relationship even after it became a diplomatic flashpoint. Zeril's ears angled back, then forward. Because the bond wasn't the escalation. The reaction to it was. We didn't create a scandal. We revealed one. She activated a data prism. The sabotage footage played in full across the chamber. Silent. Damning. Several envoys stiffened. A few aides whispered frantically behind their translation masks. We uncovered deliberate interference from within Unity systems, Kalen said. Designed to sabotage planetary peace, destroy trust, and discredit the bond as a convenient scapegoat. The arbitrator said nothing for a long time. Then finally, and why did you not report this through formal channels? Zeril answered without pause. Because formal channels were compromised. We brought it to the factions themselves. And they listened. Kalen stepped closer. You don't have to like what we've become. You don't have to understand it. But you don't get to ignore it. We succeeded, not in spite of the bond, but because of it. Silence blanketed the room again. Then the arbitrator's gaze shifted, first to Zeril, then to Kalen. You are bonded. It wasn't a question. They answered in unison. Yes. And do you stand by the consequences of that choice? Yes, Kalen said again. Zeril added. Completely. The arbitrator's silver-lined eyes glowed faintly. Then this council must decide whether to resist what has already become, or evolve with it. They stepped back. The judgment would come next. But as they stood side by side, their hands brushed, and didn't part. They were escorted to a private holding suite after the hearing, either a prison nor a guest chamber, but something in between. A message had been delivered through indirect channels. Deliberation will take 24 hours. Do not leave station quarters. Which was council speak for, you're not under arrest, but we are watching you very closely. The room was quiet, softly lit, its walls curved in neutral tones meant to calm the mind. It had 2 chairs, a sleeping berth, and one observation window that overlooked a nebula in slow rotation, a beautiful lie in the middle of a political storm. Kalen stood at the window, arms crossed, gaze fixed beyond the glass. Zeril sat with one leg folded beneath her, watching him from the low couch. Her tail hung relaxed, but her ears twitched every few minutes, betraying her tension. You haven't spoken since we got in, she said gently. He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, because I don't know what happens if they rule against us. Her voice was soft. They won't separate us. He turned. They don't have to. They just have to make it impossible for us to work again. No posts. No field duty. No planetary clearance. They could strip us of everything, our rank, our reputations. She stood, crossed the room, and took his hand. They could, she said. But I didn't bond with you because of your rank. He looked at her, eyes searching. Then why did you? She paused. And for the first time, she answered without diplomacy, without careful phrasing or layered meaning. Because the first time you challenged me, you didn't try to win. You tried to understand. You weren't threatened by what I was. You were curious. And when you looked at me, I didn't feel like a weapon. I felt seen. Kaylin swallowed hard. I've never had someone say that to me. Not even on Earth. Her tail curled slowly up and around his hip. Not tight, not binding, just present. You do now. They stood like that, close, not speaking for several heartbeats. The nebula beyond the window pulsed softly, colors shifting with slow grace. I used to think connection would weaken me, she whispered. That it would make my focus scatter, compromise the mission. But this bond didn't blur me. It refined me. Kaylin rested his forehead against hers. The moment I stop standing beside you, he murmured, is the moment I lose who I am. They remained there in silence, heartbeats sinking, bond glowing faint and warm beneath the surface of everything. Outside the suite, unseen by them both, the council debated into the night. Data was reviewed. Testimonies rewatched. Arguments flared and cooled. But in the eye of that storm, inside one quiet room on a cold diplomatic station, two souls, alien and human, held each other in the only truth that mattered now. Not power. Not permission. But choice. The council reconvened at midday. Zeril and Kaylin stood side by side once more in the judiciarium, dressed not in formal regalia, but in their field uniforms, faded from use, marked by dust and data chalk, not polished for approval. They didn't need to look like symbols anymore. They were the message. The arbitrator rose. The Unity Council has reached consensus, they said. It was not easily found. A beat of silence. Then, your bond is acknowledged. Not as anomaly, nor as threat, but as precedent. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Effective immediately. The arbitrator continued. You are no longer considered separate entities in council registry. You will serve, if you choose, as a unified envoy designation. Dual command. Dual accountability. Any assignments will be offered under that structure. Zeril's ears twitched. Kaylin didn't breathe. The arbitrator wasn't finished. However, the Council has also determined that the sabotage of the Polaris Treaty originated from inside the Unity Intelligence Division. Those responsible have been identified and are being detained pending full trial. Kaylin's chest loosened. Zeril's tail flexed behind her, sharp, alert. Your actions on Polaris have not only preserved planetary stability, the arbitrator said. They have revealed fractures within our own institution. For that we owe a debt. One we intend to pay with reform. Starting now. They leaned forward. But understand this, your bond will test every system we've built. Every assumption. You will be resisted. Feared. Misunderstood. Kaylin stepped forward. Then we'll keep doing what we've done. Not for acceptance. For truth. Zeril followed. And if fear follows us, we will walk through it. Together. The arbitrator nodded once. Then your next assignment begins immediately. Not on Polaris. Not in orbit. But across the inner spheres, where instability brews and hope is thin. The doors to the chamber opened behind them. Not as dismissal. As invitation. Zeril and Kaylin turned, walked out shoulder to shoulder. No longer envoys operating in a system that didn't know what to do with them. Now they were the system's evolution. The bond didn't fade as they left the council station. It didn't settle. It deepened. Not just in instinct, or emotion, or biology, but in choice. Over and over again, without needing to be spoken. A human and a Varellan. No longer exceptions, but proof. That in the quiet space between species, where rules fail and eyes meet, something new can begin. And if the galaxy isn't ready for it, then the galaxy will learn. One bond at a time.